parole for a prison murder when he stabbed a man to death in 1981. Abbott was doing time in an upstate New York prison when Naomi became involved with him. She left her hometown and family to live near his prison. A Ph.D. in philosophy from Columbia University, Naomi was intelligent and talented. What was it about Abbott that attracted her? He had spent his life in institutions, had committed a murder only weeks after he was released, and might, one could easily assume, murder again. I had heard that Naomi was passionately in love with Abbott and viewed him as a hero, not a criminal. I wanted to know why. As a reporter, I had often seen women in prison visiting rooms, waiting patiently to see their husbands or boyfriends. How many of those inmates were in for murder? Of the women in love with murderers, had they fallen in love after the man's conviction? If so, how did they meet? Were these women the most passionate women of all, who would not allow even prison walls to separate them from their lovers? Were they thrill seekers? Did they find it erotic and exciting to be involved with killers? Were they damaged individuals, seeking a continuation of their pain? I wondered, is it possible that the men who commit an arbitrary, sordid, pathetic, and ugly crime such as murder, in the words of writer P.D. James, can be lovable, attractive, and desirable? Or is their beauty solely in the eyes of the beholder? Since the murderers we hear the most about are those who end up behind bars, it seemed that these women were also reacting to the prison situation. They wanted a relationship with an inmate. But would any convict do? Did women also fall for burglars, white-collar criminals, drug dealers? Or was it only murderers who drew them? If so, why? Was it something in their pasts that led them to love men who had killed? When I started looking for answers to these questions, I found there weren't any. No one had examined the phenomenon of women who love murderers. Everyone knew about these women and questioned their motives, but no one had tried to understand those motives. Police, attorneys, and prison officials were all too familiar with prison groupies. Forensic psychiatrists and social workers who study the behavior of murderers were well aware that many were attractive to women and formed relationships after they were convicted. But no one knew what proportion of convicted murderers attracted women, and no one knew anything about those women. Psychiatrists and psychologists have been too busy studying the murderers themselves. It is only now that they are starting to look at murderers' relationships in hopes they'll shed some light on their behavior and motives. Apparently, my curiosity is timely. As I finished the manuscript, the movie Miami Blues was released. Its plot pivots on the relationship between a charming con-man murderer and a woman who wants to believe he is really a knight in shining armor. And forensic social worker Janet Warren, DSW, like so many other professionals I interviewed, said she believed it was time for specialists to look closely at the relationships between murderers and their women, a crossover, she calls it, between criminology and psychology. Using techniques I learned as a reporter, I managed to find dozens of women all over the country who were in love with murderers. I realized it would be impossible to talk to anyone involved with a murderer who was not yet convicted. Indeed, I was not able to interview Mary Bain Pikel until her husband's trial was just about over. So I limited my interviews only to those women in love with men already convicted of murder. Surprisingly, they were not hard to find. While many women were eager to talk about their relationships and their pasts, others were reluctant, saying they didn't want to hurt their men's cases. The women who agreed to be interviewed were gracious, helpful, talking intimately about their childhoods, past relationships, values, lifestyles, and about the men they love. These women live a difficult life, a life on the edge, never knowing whether or when they will actually be with their men. But that, I have discovered, is a large part of the attraction. The women, damaged in many ways, have a deep need to love someone with